International diplomacy operates on two separate tracks. There are the public press conferences, designed for global consumption, and then there are the closed-door bilateral negotiations, where the actual terms of a relationship are defined. Historically, the public is shielded from the specific details of these high-stakes meetings. However, a leak from March 2022 offers a look at the internal logic applied during one such encounter. This document is a Grade 2 cipher telegram, an internal communication sent by the Pakistani ambassador in Washington to his ministry in Islamabad. Sent on March 7, 2022, the cable was dispatched just as the initial global response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine was beginning to take shape. By examining the text of this specific intercept, we can track how the United States communicated its expectations regarding the future of Pakistan's internal leadership. Following the invasion, the United States and its allies sought a unified global condemnation of Russia through the United Nations. This effort met with resistance from several nations. When the vote was called at the General Assembly, Pakistan chose to abstain. The American response to this decision was delivered by Assistant Secretary of State Donald Lu, who met with Pakistani officials shortly after the vote. The primary figure of interest for the U.S. was Pakistan's Prime Minister, Imran Khan, who had arrived in Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin on the day the invasion began. According to the cable, the meeting was a direct confrontation regarding Pakistan's refusal to take a side in the conflict. What follows is a record of a diplomatic encounter where standard cooperation was replaced by a specific set of demands. In the second paragraph, the U.S. delegation defines Pakistan's stance as an aggressively neutral position. The document shows the U.S. representative narrowing the focus of this neutrality to a single individual, stating, "It seems quite clear that this is the Prime Minister's policy." This framing separates the leader from the state. By characterizing the policy as a personal decision rather than a national one, the delegation implies the policy is not a permanent fixture of the country's institutions. Lu further attributes the Prime Minister's position to his domestic standing, claiming it is tied to the current political dramas in Islamabad. At the time, the Prime Minister was facing significant internal pressure and mass protests. The cable shows the U.S. leveraging this domestic instability to question the validity of Pakistan's foreign policy. The ambassador pushes back, noting that the country's position was the result of extensive interagency consultations, rather than the isolated decision of one leader. By focusing on the leader's personal role, the U.S. delegation creates a path to request a change in leadership without appearing to demand a change in the nation's underlying security interests. In the third paragraph, the conversation moves toward specific consequences. The ambassador asks if the American reaction is tied to the UN vote. The U.S. representative clarifies that the issue is not the vote itself, but the Prime Minister's decision to visit Moscow. The cable then records a specific condition for the relationship to improve. Lu is quoted as saying, "I think if the no confidence vote against the Prime Minister succeeds, all will be forgiven in Washington." The no confidence vote is an internal parliamentary procedure. It is the mechanism by which the country's own legislature determines whether a leader should remain in power. Here, a senior American official is recorded specifying a preferred outcome for a sovereign nation's internal legislative process. The document links that outcome to the future of the bilateral relationship, noting that if the leader remains, it will be tough going ahead. This warning is extended to include Pakistan's relationship with other Western powers. The official predicts that isolation of the Prime Minister will become very strong from Europe and the United States. These paragraphs show that the U.S. expectation was not just a shift in policy regarding Ukraine. The stated requirement for normalized relations was a change in the country's internal administration. Paragraph 4 captures the ambassador's defense. He argues that the Moscow trip was part of a deliberative institutional process and points out that the invasion had not yet begun when the Prime Minister departed. The ambassador attempts to broaden the scope of the discussion by explaining the regional concerns that drove the visit. He explicitly mentions Pakistan's concern about how the Ukraine crisis would play out in the context of Afghanistan. From Pakistan's perspective, regional stability requires engagement with all neighboring powers, including Russia, to manage the ongoing security challenges in Afghanistan. This shows two different strategic priorities. The U.S. delegation focuses on the European conflict, while the Pakistani delegation is concerned with its own borders and regional security. After the ambassador finishes explaining this regional context, The cable records a brief four-word response. Don did not comment. This lack of response highlights a core dynamic in the room. The U.S. representative focuses exclusively on the Ukraine crisis, leaving the Pakistani delegation's regional concerns unanswered. The interaction demonstrates how a global power can prioritize a single international crisis over the localized security interests of a partner state. When we step back and view these two pages as a whole, we see more than just a summary of a meeting. We see a document that records the use of specific diplomatic pressure targeted at an internal political event, while the institutional arguments of the host nation are set aside. The ambassador's attempts to frame the issue through the lens of regional security failed to gain traction against a singular focus on the Ukraine conflict. Despite its bureaucratic tone, the cable captures a moment where the terms of a bilateral relationship were redefined by the outcome of a domestic vote. Analyzing these intercepts reveals the raw, transactional nature of high-level statecraft. It shows how private communication between nations differs from the diplomatic language used in public.